And like today, it was completely dead until we closed at 4 o'clock. And then like five people came in, and I was like, no, 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 no,
What
no,
are
no,
you
no.
doing? Don't you have a football game to watch?
That's what I was like, what are you doing? Go away.
There's all the people who like their partners or whatever sat down to watch football and they were like, well, I guess I'll go get books now.
Yeah. And I'm like, no, please don't.
Please, not
This is
right
not
now.
the time.
It was funny though. I was thinking like, a Joag listener comes in clutch because I can be like, hey, do you want to be on the podcast Sunday? And no, like you're not going to be at a football party.
100%.
It's like I don't think it like I asked you first, obviously, and then I asked Anna and Steve either them want to do it, and then I asked my friend Brienne, and I was like, if I had asked any of them for today, I don't think anyone would have been like, oh, can't, no, can do. I don't think
Sorry, I
so.
got those footballs to
Yeah,
watch.
Steve likes football, but I think he likes to watch like the college, not so
Oh,
much
okay.
the
Yeah.
not so much the big boys.
And my thing is like, it used to be my whole thing was like, okay, I'll watch the Super Bowl because I love watching the commercials. It's so
Exactly,
fun.
yeah.
And now they premiere the commercials like two
Right.
weeks early. So what's the
Yeah, they
point?
just put like, a list online of like, here's all the ads. Like,
Yeah. Okay, now I'm not gonna watch your stupid game.
yeah, it's such a weird
It's so
marketing
dumb.
move.
I hate
Like,
it. It's
do
like
you
they
want
don't
people to sit down and
realize.
watch your thing? Then you
Like,
have to throw a bone to those of us who wouldn't otherwise.
and like, are they still charging the insane
Right.
prices? Because
Yeah.
the whole thing was like, you will only see this during the Super Bowl and then after.
Yeah, and you have everybody's eyes right
Yeah.
now to watch this thing. Yeah, it's such a bizarre decision to me. I don't know why they would choose to do that, but
Yeah. It makes me like irrationally angry. I'm like,
yeah.
why? Why
But
have
it
you
does
done this
make it
dumb
so that
thing?
then I don't feel the need to watch. Also, the commercials aren't as good as they used to be
No, they're terrible now.
either. Like, which is interesting. Someone just posted a thing where they were saying that like they watched the Super Bowl for the commercials, but in the sense that it like gives you a sense of like where America is right now. And it's like I'm
Valid.
expecting fucked up vibes with ads, and it's so true. Like
Yeah.
it's just weird. Like sometimes they get like overly emotional some
Mhm.
years, and
Mhm.
some years they're like weirdly political, and some years they're absurdist. And it's like, yeah, it is a weird taking the temperature of the nation thing.
Yeah, the one I've seen is the one, the Mountain Dew commercial starring Seal as a seal.
Okay, I can get behind that. That feels like the old school sort of like weird shit that you signed on for.
Yeah.
Like when
It
it used to
was
be like the Old Spice guy, you know?
exactly. It's very Old Spice
Yeah.
coded. Yeah, he's singing a version of Kiss by a Rose, but it's
Sure.
about Mountain Dew. And it's like, okay,
This Mountain Dew knows what they are, you
a
know?
100%.
It's like why are like truck and beer companies always trying to make us cry now? Like
Right? Like that's not yeah.
doesn't have to be the and twins commercials again or anything, but like come on.
Oh, they're all terrible and dumb, and I don't care about either of the teams, and I don't care.
Here, here. I mean, in my heart, I'm always rooting against Taylor Swift, so whichever team that is. But
That's fair.
like, which one is she not about? That's the one. Although apparently, because news is also the dumbest thing on earth, there was like a segment the other day on Good Morning America about like Taylor Swift's attachment to both teams. Which one will she root for? Because her boyfriend is on one team, but her father likes the other one. Like, come on.
Guys,
Let's be
why
serious.
is this news?
Why yeah, why is this happening right now? I just
No one cares.
no one
Taylor Swift
cares.
doesn't give a shit about football.
No. Yeah. Like,
She
come on.
doesn't care.
She does not care. Just like none of us would be like, good job, boyfriend, or whatever.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
did your job. Yay.
right? Like
You got paid.
she's never been at a football game before this guy. Like it's not like,
No.
oh, she was like a huge Philly fan or whatever, and now like, whoa, the allegiance she has to. It's like just such a weird narrative. Like,
I keep getting this like sponsored ad for I don't even know what the company is, but they're like, ooh, if they show Taylor at the Super Bowl, everyone on this list will get like a $25 gift card to our store or whatever. I'm
Well, good
like,
for them because they're getting that gift card.
right. I'm like, obviously they're gonna, what
They're
is
just
this?
gonna ignore her. Just gonna
Like,
pretend she's not there.
it's so dumb. It's so dumb. And I live
I
in a
hate
house
it.
full of Swifties,
Right.
Corey.
Yeah, it's like yeah, if anyone should be amenable, but there comes a point where you have to be like, come on.
It's like
This is going too far.
I love that my girls love her. It's very cute to watch them sing and
Right.
dance along.
Yes, exactly. I'm like, I get, my
But
friends' children.
like,
That's who should be into Taylor Swift,
right, the
is like a
children.
5-year-old.
Yes,
It's like
exactly. It
when I
should
see
not
my
be
friends' kids being into Taylor Swift, I'm like, yeah, no, that adds up.
right. Yeah, she's a
Right?
pop star.
When I see a 40-year-old woman in a friendship bracelet,
Yeah,
I'm like,
it's a lot.
look,
It's a
come on
lot.
now.
It's a lot.
She's a billionaire.
She's a billionaire and no one should be billionaires.
No,
Like
it should be billionaires.
there should
Not
be no
even Taylor Swift.
billionaires. It just ugh.
How hard is that to? There's no exceptions. Rihanna's
No.
not an exception. Nobody's an exception,
Nobody's an exception. There should be no billionaires. That is too much money.
right?
I
If
don't
you
care
have
how
that,
much charity she does. It's not enough because she's still a billionaire.
and like the other thing that always gets me is I'm like, okay, if you want to convince me she is a good billionaire, then I want to see her out there, like literally at a Palestine rally. I want her to like vocally, because she's got nothing to lose. Once you got $1 billion,
Yeah.
no one can take anything from you.
No.
Period. So anything that you choose not to speak on is because you don't care.
Right.
Like that's
Yeah.
the people are always trying to convince you, like, oh, she cares about this, that, and the other thing. And I'm like, she'd say it.
No. Yeah.
Wouldn't be a secret.
Especially now that her tour is over. So
Right?
it's
Yeah.
not
She
even
doesn't
like
have to
she's
worry
putting
about, yeah.
she's not putting her audience at risk
Mm-hmm.
because there are no more gatherings.
Right? Exactly. Like,
So it's not
go
even she
ahead
can't
and
even be like, "Oh, I'm choosing not to speak because I don't want like a terrorist attack at my
right.
show." Which
Yeah. It's like,
sure.
sure.
Tour's over, babe.
Right? Like,
Haven't heard
say
anything.
your thing now if you care about this.
Yeah.
It's always I see that clip all the time from like her Netflix
Oh my God, the
documentary.
documentary, yeah.
Yeah, where she's like talking to her dad and like about some political thing that she's going to speak on or something.
Yeah,
And it
she's gonna
always
like
strikes
endorse
me. Yeah,
yeah,
like she's
Taylor
going to endorse
person.
Biden or like something like that. I don't remember what the case was, but I just always am struck by the fact that in that clip she says, I need to be on the right side of history, not I need to do the right thing.
Mm.
And every time I think about that, I'm like, yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
think it's the brand
Yeah.
in it.
It's always the brand.
It's the brand. Anyways, so I'm rooting for the other team, whichever one that is.
Go birds.
Go Birds! Yes. I like literally can't remember who these teams are. I'm like, I don't know. Last year I did sit and watch it. Kia was here. And like, I can watch any sports thing,
Yeah.
especially with like Keo.
Yeah.
By myself, I don't know if I have the wherewithal to sit through that. Does Mike watch it?
Yeah. But again, he like doesn't really care.
Right. Just kind of like, there's a game on.
Yeah.
We're all watching the game.
Yep.
Yeah, it's kind of how
Wee
I am about
football.
it. I
Yeah.
like liveness. I like the idea of like, oh, if you like, I'll walk the dog after this, and I love walking past people's houses and
Yeah.
looking in, and every single TV is on the same thing. Like I like that sense
Yes.
of like everybody is doing the same thing tonight. Like that's
Yeah.
cool that we're
That
all
hasn't
doing
happened in
this.
like
Yeah, right.
right.
It's
We used
rare
to
that
all
you
do
get
that.
something like this. Yeah.
Right.
People did that like if you had walked by during the MASH finale, like
Exactly.
on a Sunday night you used to
Exactly.
walk by and all the TVs were watching The Simpsons and like now we
Yes.
just get that for the Super Bowl. So I enjoy going on my walk, looking in the windows, being like, look at us
I see
united.
you.
Look at us.
See
Look at us
you.
doing a thing. Anyways, so maybe I'll include the preamble in there, put that in the video version or something like that I always have if people watch the video version, there's always like more mistakes and like more just like random shit that I just cut out because I'm like, Nobody cares about that. But on the video, I'm like, that's too much work. If you're watching the video, you get everything.
You get all of it.
You get the whole thing.
It's
Whatever
uncut.
we're talking about. Did I put up? I think I put up in 2 weeks ago when John Benfield was on. He jumped in, as like Mark and I were talking beforehand, and it was that like Mark was talking about how like he's been hearing a noise like against my mic or whatever, like a ruffling or whatever. And at the moment that John Benfold entered, I was like, is it my titties? He was like, I think it's your titties. John was like, oh, here it is. This is what it's like, huh?
Sorry, can't change that.
Yep. Welcome to Joag. I got this desktop computer. I just looked. I've had it for like about a year, I think. Maybe a little less than that. But you would think that I just got it yesterday because I could never find the icons on the bottom. So every time I go every single week for the past year since I got this computer, I go and I start GarageBand and I look at it, I'm like, great, how do I get Mark back? And then I go and I have to like stare at every single icon, like what is the program called? Like what am I looking? Zoom is the program. Great. Which one of the icons is that? And it's every week. And then I usually have my notes open in Edge. And so I have to open that up as well. And I'm like, all right, give me a second. So every week after the clap is the like me sitting here going, okay, I've seen a computer before.
I know I've done this.
I know I've done this at some point. Now I just got a new MacBook too.
Ooh,
so, I'm going through the same thing on that. My current struggle is that I can't figure like I know how to click and drag something, but apparently I don't. So every time I try to click and drag something, there's just shit popping open and whatnot. And I'm like,
no.
I'm 39. Not yet. Not yet, please.
This shouldn't be beyond me yet.
I shouldn't be having this problem. Dear God.
Oh my God.
So welcome, Ryan. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much for being here, my dear.
Oh my God, I'm so excited.
Me too. Have we had you on Joag before?
Not for the main feed.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That is insanity. I was like, think about it. I'm like, wait a minute. Yeah. First main feed Ryan, which is bananas. So everyone, listen, you probably already know who Ryan is, whether you are a part of the Joag community or you're out there on BookTok. You're probably familiar with Ryan Clark. I almost said Ryan Foley. It just like
old
randomly went way back here. Ryan Clark, the queen of Scream, of Gibson's bookstore, like I said, all over the tickety-tockety, doing all the booky things, meeting all the horror authors, and sharing the love of horror and whatnot with us on the Laydown podcast. Ryan, welcome to Joag.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for having me.
It's wonderful to have you here. Listen, I gave our dear Marco the month of February off. Month of February. Marco's not gonna be here for month of February. I gave Marco the month of February off. What's going on? What is happening? The month of February off. I think maybe February is just a harder month to pronounce. I see why people say February.
Yeah. That extra R is like
it's
evil.
Troublesome when you try to use it in a full sentence. Slows you right down. I gave Marco this month off because we have talked on Joag every year. The beginning of the year is always very difficult for Mark. And I was like, you know what? You're stressed out. Why don't we take a little breather, and I will invite some of our best gals onto the podcast each week to tell me a story. So this week, next week, the week after, we have some of our bestest friends on here to tell a story, sort of a bridged Joag. We're just going to have a nice little relaxed chat and talk about something. Ryan this week, our dear friend Anna of Hell Rankers next week, and my friend Brienne the week after that. I don't know what stories anyone's telling to me in the tradition of the cold open, but we're just going to do that, have a good time. Mark will be on the Ko-Fi, as always. We're going to be doing a Let's Play. He got a new game he's excited about. And as promised last week, we are going to do a little a snack this month. Instead of doing a snack to the future, we're going to talk about the movie Companion, because we both saw it last week and we were like, we cannot just all the fun stuff in it would be a major spoiler to like say on main. So we decided that we're going to give everyone a chance to go see Companion, which you absolutely should. And we're going to talk about that as a snack this month. So Mark will be around, but on the main feed, we are #blessed to have Ryan this week. So
Coming to you
Ryan,
live from an empty bookstore.
yes, I love it. I was saying to Ryan before this, and if you're watching the YouTube version of this, I probably left it in, but this is the dream right here. Just like you live the absolute dream.
It's true.
um, so Ryan, what do you have for me this week?
So I considered joking about talking about my favorite Hungry Boy again, Tarar.
Who did it best? Third time.
Both of you. I'm obsessed with him. I love him.
Yeah, I have to read that book too.
It's
What's
good.
it called?
We're doing it for book club, right? The Glutton.
Oh, are we? Oh, yeah, we are doing The Glutton. That's right.
Yeah,
Oh, good.
because it's finally out in paperback.
That's bless you, because as Ryan knows, I will not read a book if it's not in paperback. That's not entirely true, because obviously a lot of library books are in hardcover, but the cover can't come off because they've like laminated the shit out of it or whatever. I have like hardcover books are too much responsibility for me generally. So The Glutton is out in paperback, and we're reading that. jackofallgrapes.com/book-club.
Yeah, it's so good. It's so good. Okay. But I went down several rabbit holes
Love it.
in
Love a rabbit
trying
hole.
to come up with a topic, because I was like, oh my God, I have so many interests. And like what I had all these like spooky nonfiction books. I was like, I could talk about so many things. And I found some fascinating things in my rabbit holes.
This is always the thing, right? It's like you start looking at one thing and then it's like, oh, that's an interesting side note. Let me look at that. Oh, that's an interesting side note. And
yeah, like
Lord knows, hours later.
Oh my God, it was incredible. I have so many things bookmarked right now. Like,
beautiful.
Apparently there was a case in 2004 that is beat for beat the exact telephone pole scene from Hereditary.
Bruh. Do you think it's like, I don't know if
I
you
think
looked
Ari
any further.
Aster,
Was it like based on that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it is beat
like with the allergy attack and everything?
It doesn't mention the allergy attack, but it is a guy driving his friend home from a party, and his friend is sticking his head out the window. The guy accidentally sideswipes a telephone pole and then drives home.
Wow.
And goes to bed, and a neighbor finds the body the next morning. It's literally the same.
Yeah, that has to be based on, that would be a bananas coincidence.
But I'm like, I've never seen, and maybe I just haven't dug deep enough, but I've never seen anyone talk about that. And
no,
I find
me neither.
Fascinating that like this is a real thing that happened.
That's crazy.
Holy shit.
Anyway. Okay, so there's one for other people to rabbit hole.
Absolutely.
On,
go on Wikipedia and look up weird deaths. It's so much fun.
It's true. Yep, have done it.
And then I also considered talking about the Elisa Lam murder mystery.
Mm-hmm.
The woman
that one's it's a lot.
It's a lot. She was found in a water tank at a hotel. There is a book called The Last by Hannah Jameson that is a like sci-fi apocalyptic story, but there is a character found in a water tank at a hotel, and I was like, oh cool, that like inspired that, like
yeah that story always, the worst, I mean, not to say the worst thing is a woman died, but one of the grossest details of the Elisa Lam story is just the fact that like people were like drinking the water in the hotel and they're like, this tastes funny. Like,
yeah.
No, that's person.
And like, how long were they?
Right.
Yeah,
Ooh,
real bad.
horrifying.
The Cecil Hotel has a lot
There's
of
a lot going on there.
bad, bad things. I've
Bad
seen
vibes.
a few documentaries on it, and I'm just like,
Yeah.
no, why?
Yeah. No, there's like
Um,
those LA like skeevy hotels, like
yeah,
just hubs of misery.
yeah,
Hubs.
yeah. Um, I was gonna try to like find something like light and fun and like maybe a little bit like goofy to talk about,
Sure.
but I am who I am. And so I
Yes.
got a real downer. And
Perfect.
I
Yes. Bring us
apologize in
down.
advance.
Bring us down this Super Bowl Sunday.
I'm bringing you down. All right. I'm bringing you back to January of 1900.
Okay. History.
History. I did research. I have notes. You will hear them.
Yes. Oh yeah, this is like a news anchor, like paper
Yes,
notes.
I have
Beautiful.
notes. So the year is 1900. It's January, and the Florida State Reform School opens. And for the next century, this school undergoes a name change,
Sure.
lots of leadership changes, several investigations, like so
Yeah.
many
It's when you start at reform
investigations.
school already,
It's
bad
you
vibes.
know you're in for
Right. Has there ever been a
a bad
reform school
time.
that just has like a really cool history? It's like there
Yeah.
was never any
There's
problem. Everybody
never
was like really
been
happy
like a
here.
cool reform school.
Yeah. It's like a cool troubled teen industry or something
Right?
like that.
Let's
Cool
punish
conversion camp.
children
Yeah.
for nothing.
Right.
Um, Despite all of those things, the reform school, later known as the Arthur G. Dozier School for Boys, was a place of horrific abuses, tortures, and murders, and would become the inspiration for both Colson Whitehead's The Nickel Boys,
I was like, wait a minute, I just saw this movie.
uh-huh, as well as Tananarive Dew's The Reformatory.
And I just read that book.
And that is why I am talking about it today,
Beautiful. On
because it's
top of
been
it.
coming up a lot, and I was like,
Yeah.
let's get into the real history.
Please do, because I have been curious about it. I just
Yes.
finished The Reformatory, which is phenomenal. And if you have
Mhm.
not read it, folks, get on it.
Yep.
Mark read it like a
Yep.
month ago. Off of he talked about this on Joag, but was in that like obviously in the past few years we've gone in the don't buy from Amazon, buy all your books from indie bookstores. So he went to his local bookstore and it had the little card with the
Mhm.
recommendations from the bookstore employees and he was like, I'm sold, I'm in. This is
Yeah,
the beauty of going to your indie bookstore is getting that
absolutely.
experience and finding a new favorite like this, which is absolutely was. I immediately started reading it afterwards. I know that Laura Latour has
Hmm.
started reading it, like, and it's catching. Everyone should read it.
Yeah,
Um, I did go see Nickel Boys, which, from what I hear, the book is amazing. That
yeah,
movie I hated with my whole soul,
that's
and didn't understand what was going on at all throughout that. So it gave me no sense of what was going on at this school or anything like that. Because most of the time I was just like, why am I looking at corners? I don't know why we have been looking at someone's shoes for the past
Oh,
90 seconds.
oh no, it pulled a
So
Skinamarink.
it, big time Skinamarink. It's
Oh,
drama
terrible.
Skinamarink. So
Hate that.
that listen, a lot of people apparently very much like that. My theater very much didn't, and probably
Mm,
half the audience walked out.
yeah, I
But
can
if
see that.
it's your thing, if you liked Skinamarink,
Yeah,
you probably like
you
it.
know,
But
you
that
might love
said,
it.
having just experienced both of those things, I'm excited to actually hear. I mean, excited in like the like, oh God, this is going to be awful sort of way, but really
Yeah,
interested to hear
yeah.
about this place. So tell me about it.
I will. So I will say at the top, I will not go into great detail about the abuses because I don't want to
Yeah,
trigger anyone because they were truly horrific.
right,
So I'm going to try to gloss over them for the most part
right.
as far as like nitty-gritty details.
Yeah, we don't listen.
I,
We know the history
yeah,
of this country.
yeah.
You can make assumptions.
So January 1st, 1900, the Florida State Reform School opened in the panhandle of Florida in a town called Mariana. It was this big open space. There were no fences.
Mm.
There were two campuses. It was segregated. One campus for the white kids, one campus for the black kids. And right from the start, this place was a mess.
Mm.
In the first 13 years of its operation, this school was investigated no less than 6 times.
Jesus. Which is like really saying something because like every school like that was terrible at the time. So like if
Yeah.
they're consistently investigating you, it's like
Like
yikes.
what do you do? Why?
Yeah.
Uh there was one report from 1903 which stated that students were commonly being kept in leg irons.
Oh.
Super
Why do
cool.
they have leg irons?
Why?
Like
Why do they have leg irons?
where do you even get that? It's
Like,
not
why
at
is that a
Sears.
thing? Right.
Yeah, like nobody asks questions. Gee, this like they seem to be bringing a lot of leg irons over that place.
Right?
What?
And like all of these investigations and like nothing
Yeah,
changes.
right. That's really the thing about it being 1900 or whatever is like they investigated a lot and then they're like, "Oh, don't do that."
Yeah.
And then left.
Maybe
I
change
wish you
that.
wouldn't.
And then they
Yeah,
don't follow up.
right.
In 1929, an 11-room concrete building was constructed, which students called the White House.
Mm.
And I have seen photos of the White House, and it is terrifying looking.
This is another like a thing from history. Is like anytime something is called the White House, it's going to be the most horrific thing you've ever heard of in your life.
Yeah,
Always is.
it's real sketchy looking. The White House was where the quote unquote incorrigible or violent white kids were kept in cells in isolation. The black kids had their own sort of isolation place on their campus. However, the majority of the abuses and the beatings took place in the White House, regardless of skin color.
Okay.
The school did remain fully segregated until like the late 60s,
Hmm.
but the White House that was where you went.
So that's where you integrated everybody right there.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
true cultural mixing when it comes to torture.
Yes. And if you've read The Reformatory, I believe Tananarive Due calls it like the fun house,
Yeah, it's
maybe?
something like that. I think that sounds right.
And
Yeah.
that is this place.
Yeah, it's horrifying.
And
Again,
it is
read the book.
horrifying.
It's terrible.
In 1968, we're jumping around a little bit.
Sure.
Florida Governor Claude Kirk visited the school and found like overcrowding and poor conditions. And he's quoted as saying that, quote, somebody should have blown the whistle a long time ago. Yeah, my
Yeah,
guy.
like those
What are you going
those
to do
first
about it?
6 investigations in the first 13 years of
Right?
its existence. Yeah. I
Now,
love that, like, I mean, I'm assuming this is a white governor here
yeah,
being 1968. In what state did you say? Was it
Florida.
Florida? It was
Yeah.
Florida's governor. Like, the way white people will, like, have lived in a segregated Jim Crow-ass society and then somehow be surprised by it. You
Yes.
know, like, I can't believe no one did anything about this. Like, sir, the Civil Rights Act was 5 years ago.
Right.
It was,
Like,
like,
yeah.
gee, I wonder, or 4 years ago, I guess, from there.
Weird.
Like, yeah, I wonder why nobody mentioned it.
Gosh. And so at this time, so it's the late 60s, the school housed 564 boys,
Wow.
some for offenses as minor as school truancy, running away
Mm,
from home, and what they called incorrigibility. You'll hear that
right.
word come up a lot,
Mm.
which mostly included things like smoking cigarettes.
And would that be like, would the offenses be, I don't know if you know this, but would the offenses be that small for both black and white kids?
It seemed that way.
Okay.
The school population, the demographic was about 3 to 1 black
Sure.
kids to white kids. And there were some students who had committed horrific like
Sure.
assaults and violence and things like
Right.
that. But it definitely was basically like, oh, you are causing a little bit of trouble. You maybe gave a cop some lip. We're going to send you
Right.
to this reform school.
Yeah. Like in Nickel Boys, it's, basically a kid getting caught in a car with someone who had stolen the car, and
Right.
not knowing that. And in the Reformatory, it's a kid, kicking a white kid in the shin for hitting on his sister. Like
Yeah.
that, very, very small offenses, which, we talked about a little bit in terms of like black folks and, the Reconstruction a few weeks ago as well, which is something I'd like to go into a little more. But
Mm.
that kind of being a huge function of Jim Crow, which is why I asked, like, was it the same for the white kids?
Mm.
Because one of the ways that resegregation worked and the way that, Jim Crow worked was by um, punishing Black people for tiny little offenses like vagrancy and stuff like that. That was basically, are you outside and not at work at 3 p.m.? Well, you're clearly up to no good.
Right.
Throw you in jail. So it sounds like it has bits of that, and it has bits of what would later become like the troubled teen industry, where
Right.
parents send their kids off to their kids start smoking or something like that, and they're like, whoa, we better scare them straight, and they send them to these horribly abusive
Yeah.
facilities.
Yeah. And like from the outside, um, it seemed almost like a college. Like there was
Sure.
like a football team and there were these like there's no fences. It seems
Right. Yeah, they
like well
can they can
manicured
leave. They can come and
lawns
go.
and it's free. Like you can go and like you get all your meals for free. Like it
Right.
seemed and for some of these kids who had really troubled homes, it was like, well, I'd
Sure.
rather go there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And then they got there
Right.
and it was awful.
Right.
Um, so the kids in the late 60s were ranging in age from like 10 to 16 years old. And the White House was officially closed in 1967.
Okay.
And
It's
officially,
late.
right?
Yeah.
Officially, corporal punishment at the
Mm.
school was banned in August of 1968. So,
Sure.
you know,
Hmm.
naturally after that, everything was hunky
Yeah.
dory and it was totally
All
fine and everything was
fixed.
fixed.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, no, just kidding.
No need to peek
Because
behind that curtain.
the school remained open.
Right.
Shocking. In 1982,
Oh
an
boy.
inspection revealed that boys at the school were, quote, hogtied and kept in isolation for weeks at a time.
In 1982.
1982.
Jesus Christ. Like,
This
that's
is not
insane.
that long ago.
No, like, that's 3 years before I was born.
Yep.
That is That's crazy. Like that
Yeah.
level of corporal punishment. Because I know that like that kind of stuff after it was banned, like obviously snuck by in certain
Right.
places, right?
Of
Especially when you have like
course.
Catholic schools and things like that, a little rap with a ruler.
Yeah.
Christian schools, a lot of Christian schools would have like a paddle or something like that,
Yeah.
But 1982 to have that level of egregious corporal punishment
Yeah.
is like next level.
Yeah. Especially after, corporal punishment was banned in 68.
Right. Like you're not supposed to be doing it at all, and you're hog tying
For hog tying
children?
your students. Cool. I'm sure that's helping a lot.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
reforming them.
They're gonna be great citizens after this.
Right?
No problems.
Yeah. They're going to be great in society. And at this time, so in 1982, the Dozier School was housing 105 boys aged 13 to 21.
Okay, so
So
it's like
they've gone
dwindled at
down.
this point, yeah.
They've whittled it down from the
Right. Because they're not
564.
just arresting every kid who like looks at a cop
Right.
funny at this point.
Right. But that's still a decent amount of children.
Hmm.
Um, in the
And
early
very young. Like,
2000s.
have you seen a 13-year-old boy?
God,
Like
right?
a
Like, come
13-year-old
on.
boy as like just like this tiny
They're just
little
babies.
baby. Yeah, like
Yeah.
that's not that's imagining. I mean, and before you were saying as young as 10, but even at this point, like 13 is like you. When
Yeah.
you see a 13-year-old boy, they seem impossibly young.
They are babies.
Yeah.
They are so young.
Yes. And 13-year-old girls for that matter, but obviously we're
True.
talking about a
Yeah, of
school that only
course.
houses boys.
Right. This is in general, this is a school for boys.
Yes.
Um Now, in the early 2000s, a group of survivors who call themselves the White House Boys began to speak out about the abuses that they suffered and witnessed during
Mm,
their time at the Dozier School. Now, again, I won't go into details about the specific abuses, but
sure.
needless to say, they were utterly horrific. And it is absolutely heartbreaking to read the firsthand accounts from these now grown men talking about what happened to them and the other boys they knew as children.
And from what I gather, like not to go into details about anything, but like we're talking like physical, sexual, like every kind of possible
Yes,
abuse here. It's not,
absolutely.
they did not limit themselves in the ways in which they tormented these poor kids.
No, it was every possible abuse you can imagine
And ones we
was
can't because we
inflicted.
are not that
Yeah,
just
because we're not
soulless.
sadistic. Yeah.
Right.
There is a website, which I will share so you can put it in the
Nice.
blog, for the White House Boys, and they have compiled like resources and stories from the survivors, and there are like they have like a playlist of all of the videos about the school. There have been documentaries and things like that. Lots of books have been published about this, and that is all compiled on their website, and there are photos that you can look at. And
Mm,
so like I saw a photo of the White House and like my heart just sank because I was like,
mm,
that looks like an evil building. Like if a
right.
building can be evil, that one
Yeah.
is evil, right? Like I don't believe in ghosts, but that is haunted,
Right. Yeah. Like
right?
there is something that just it exudes from the years of misery and horror that has happened that's like palpable without
Yes.
ever having to step through the door.
Yes, and it is utterly heartbreaking to click through the photos that they've compiled because there are photos of like the football team
Right.
and like all of the kids posing, and they're like, they're just
Right.
kids.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and then there's this photo of a few of the survivors like recording an episode of a podcast, and they're, in their like 60s, 70s, and they look so sad. Like
Right.
these men are just, you can see the trauma etched into their skin.
Mm,
It is
yeah.
utterly heartbreaking, but I do encourage people who are curious to go to that website and do a little bit of extra reading.
Yeah, I just
Um,
finished The Barn, and I can't think of who the author is, but you've probably
mm,
heard of it, nonfiction that's about Emmett Till. And it
mm,
goes into so like the barn where Emmett Till was killed.
mm,
And then this book is so expansive and I highly recommend it. I've never read any history book that is as big a feat as
mm.
this one is, and the webs of connection between the South and Emmett Till and his family and jazz and like like all these different things that like wind up in that culture to lead to this horrific murder there and
Yeah.
whatnot. But one of the things that is really striking about this book is that, I mean, a great thing about it is that everyone involved died miserably in terms of the white guys that like did
Yeah.
this, like just horrific lives. They were shunned from society, even though they were innocent. I mean, not innocent. They were um, not guilty in their trial,
Hmm.
so like they were
Hmm.
acquitted.
Yeah.
But it was like a bridge so far that like they were like, you've made Alabama look bad.
Yeah.
And so they were basically shunned by all of society, lived that way. At least one of them died of cancer. That was like really painful. And you're like, good.
Good.
That's what I like to hear. But you also see like on people who were related to him, his
Mm.
friends and cousins who were there and things like that, that like they're just so tortured. their
Mm.
whole lives by this, and the men that they became were just so deeply sad, like just like you're
Ah,
describing, like it's just like this heavy sadness that like never left them at any
yeah.
point in their life, you know, just always this air of trauma lingering
Yeah.
over them that came from this, you know, horrific experience, much like what happened with all of these kids.
Yeah.
You don't just kind of like especially because it's not like they got out of there and like went to therapy, you
Mm.
know. Like if you were in this school in 1968 or 1982 for that matter, you didn't get
Mhm.
out and it was like, oh, better get a better help account, you know. Like it was like you were on your own here, so
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
the healing from that, you know,
Yeah.
not coming together and making this website or whatever in like the 2000s and coming out
Yeah.
about it, like that's so so much time that they were just like sitting with that until they talked to each other and were like, maybe
Yeah.
we can talk about this.
Maybe we
Maybe that's
should.
okay. Yeah, maybe we
Yeah.
should actually discuss what happened here.
Ugh, it's so sad. I know that at one point there were about 400 members
Oh
of the White
wow.
House Boys.
Wow.
Yep, of course that number, fluctuates as new people come forward and obviously people pass because
Right.
it was,
Yeah, a long time ago.
a lot of these men were there in the 60s.
Hmm.
So they're older now.
Yes.
Um but more than 300 of them have now publicly recounted their
Wow.
stories. Their mission statement I was reading is to basically to bring awareness to the abuses and to protect children from abuse in the future. Like they're
Mm,
really like, how do we prevent this from happening to the next
right.
generations?
Which is
They,
like, I mean, it feels like obviously something that's like, oh, this couldn't happen, but I feel like we are saying that a lot these days, right? Oh, that
yeah,
could never happen. Did that just happen?
ooh, look
Um,
at that. It happened.
right. Like I can see, I feel like the idea of, because you hear this from conservatives all the time, of the idea of like bringing back corporal punishment and things like that, first in the home and then of course in schools as well.
Yeah.
Um, and so the idea of restrictions being taken off of that and whatnot is not like an impossible thing to believe.
No. Um, as for sort of their, I guess, explanation for what went on at this school, they cite things like overcrowding, which, yeah, at one point there were almost
Sure.
600 students in this
Right.
school, lack of funding, and a lack of training in the staff for the abuse. Um, but honestly, if you ask me, an excuse for terrible adults to torture children with the
Exactly.
state's approval.
Right. 100%. Like that's, I mean, they say the same shit about like Guantanamo Bay and stuff like that,
Exactly.
right? But if you put adults who aren't sociopaths in that situation,
Yeah.
what will they do with overcrowding and underfunding and things? They will make do. We see teachers do this
Yeah.
every day. Overcrowded classrooms, underfunded classrooms, things like that. And they don't then torture children. They figure out,
Right.
how do I save and, you know, scrimp to be able to make this an environment that these kids can still thrive in. So the idea that it was just
Yeah.
like, they got stressed out and, you know, they just weren't trained well. Like that only
Yeah.
that's sociopaths do that, sure, but the
Right.
rest of us would not do this, you
No.
know? Like it's one thing to be like, "Oh, people get frustrated from the conditions and sometimes they yell at kids."
Right.
Okay, you shouldn't yell at
Sure.
kids, but like
Yeah.
sure that happens. But
Yeah.
that's on a completely different planet from, you know, sexual abuse and having a
Mhm.
house dedicated to torturing children and things
Yeah.
like that. That doesn't just like, oops, there were too many leg irons, having leg irons in the place.
Yeah.
Like, let the kids
That's
run
not
then, you know? And it's
right.
also part of that sort of, as much as they cry underfunding or whatever, like it's for profit, you
Hmm.
know, like for profit prisons and things like that. that like they are getting a degree of money from the state and it doesn't matter. They shove as many kids in here as they can, like bad foster parents, because they're getting X amount of money for each kid they put in there. The overcrowding isn't because there's too many kids, it's because they're like, arrest
Yeah.
more children. Give
Yeah.
more
Send them to
children so they
us.
get more money. I mean, even this like idea of the White House makes me think of the story of John Henry. Have you ever heard like the legend of John Henry? It's a sort of
Yeah.
man versus machine story.
Mm-hmm.
So this guy,
Yes.
right? Like it's like a thing you probably hear when you're a kid, a folk tale of this guy who challenges the machine and beats it, but then dies immediately. And there's a song that kind of goes with it
Mm-hmm.
and whatnot. There's a book that was put out probably 20 years ago now, 15, 20 years, somewhere in that, by a guy, I think his name was Scott Reynolds Nelson, where he was researching something else and he came across a postcard that had a whole bunch of prison inmates on it in front of this White House.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and on it, I believe it had like a notation that mentioned a man named John Henry on it. And he was like, now hold on. This is
Hmm.
interesting, and like
Yeah.
John Henry's not the most unusual name in the world or whatever, but he started
Sure.
looking into this and he noticed, like he basically dove into the history of this prison and he found out that people who were sent to this prison, black men sent to this prison, were being essentially sold back into slavery, which is what the
Mm-hmm.
13th Amendment is about, right? To
Mm-hmm.
work on the B&O railroads.
Right.
And as such, sort of, they built the railroads that we use in this day and age, the industrialization, all that kind of stuff were built by these prisoners. And they would die in such great numbers that they found later on a mass grave outside of this White House, where they were just basically taking all these men who died on the railroads and just tossing them in there. And he thinks John Henry is one of those guys. He found records of this man named John Henry who died on there. He thinks that it was sort of started as like a cautionary tale about like don't work too hard for your enslavers,
Yeah.
basically, that like
Mm.
he died working on these railroads, was thrown into this pit outside the White House that we only found out again like 20 years ago.
Mm.
Um and it's just this kind of pattern that you see happen again with like things like these kids and with our own prison industrial complex now, or what you see with the native kids and the boarding schools and stuff like that, this like
Yeah.
total like lack of respect for these kids lives, and for people of color's lives especially, but acting like, oh, that it was, we weren't funded well enough for things like this, when really those kids were only there, those guys working on the railroad were only there to make them money.
Yeah.
And the reason that the conditions were so bad is because they didn't use the money for
Right.
those kids. They didn't
Right.
use the money for those prisoners. They kept
No.
that, and they kept the kids in irons.
Yeah. Yeah. They weren't investing back into the, oh,
Right.
let's
Like
make
we
it
really,
safer and better.
yeah,
And
they didn't, the
no, they didn't
reform
care.
school is really, really stretching what reform means, because they weren't trying to make the kids better. They
No.
didn't care about what would happen when they left the reformatory, if they left the
If they
reformatory,
left.
right?
Yeah. And I will get into that.
Okay.
Um, so jumping ahead to April of 2007, the acting superintendent of the school and one other employee were fired following allegations of abuse of inmates.
Sorry, 2007?
2007.
This is still running
Yep.
in 2007.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
Fuck me. Okay, go on.
Yep. Um, at which point the state finally officially acknowledged that abuses had taken place there. This was the
No.
first time that the state was like, yeah, yeah, some abuse happened.
Even after 1969, the governor
All
goes
of,
and is like, gee, this seems shifty.
yep, all of these investigations, all of the, nothing changed. The state just sort of wrote it off. They
Right.
were like, it's a reformatory school, like whatever.
Yeah, it's not supposed to be a happy place.
Yep, they just wrote it off. So it wasn't until
Wow.
2007 that Florida was like, "Oh, yeah, maybe this is bad."
Mm, Jesus Christ.
And in 2008, October of 2008, a ceremony was actually held to install a historic plaque at the White House that acknowledged that past. Now, again, the White House had been closed for like 40
Okay.
years at this
So
point.
they closed that like as soon as corporal
That was
punishment was
closed
banned. They were
in the
like,
60s. Yeah.
okay. But it was just there. They didn't
But it was just
bulldoze
there.
it.
I
They
mean,
didn't,
it's
it just
it's
like
still there.
looming house of misery.
Yeah. No, it's still
Nice.
there. It's still standing. Um, one former student uh stated that he was punished in the White House 11 times, receiving a total of more than 250 lashes.
Oh my God.
And
Oh,
I read somewhere that the like belt that they used for lashes was like 3 inches wide. Like it
good
was
God. This is
bad.
it's like one of those things where like, thankfully my parents weren't into the whole corporal punishment thing.
Mhm.
I was spanked once as a child when my dad got scared because I ran across the road. It just
Yep.
panicked him, and that's literally it.
Yeah.
And I just think about like the idea of like I can't even imagine how much that hurts.
Hmm.
And the thing that always gets me is the fact that like the element of surprise makes a thing hurt more,
Yeah.
and you can't know exactly when the person is going to hit you.
Right.
And
Or how
so,
many
or
times?
how many times. So the combination of the pain and the anticipation of the pain and whatnot just seems like one of the most like torturous things to go
Yeah.
through.
And there is a uh there's at least one scene in the reformatory that takes place in essentially the White House
Mm-hmm.
that describes a very specific beating. And the description, which I will not read here, but the description that this student described of some of the beatings that took place was
Yeah.
pretty spot on from
Right.
the reformatories. So you can, use your imagination, but it was
Right.
absolutely horrific.
Yeah.
This was torture.
Yeah. And
This
that's one of the
was
things the reformatory really does get across really, really well is like
yeah.
the other element of that besides the actual beatings, which are horrible, but is also the psychological element of hearing them and
Hmm.
waiting for yours or like
Yes.
knowing this could happen to you and things like that, that like
Yeah.
the level of trauma from living your entire life trying to make sure you don't make the mildest slip up
Hmm.
to avoid that happening to you. It's
Right.
like like just imagine trying to live like that. I'm not great with authority, you know.
No.
So like the idea of having to just constantly keep in line and hold back any sense of like pride or humanity for yourself in order
Yeah.
to avoid that. Like again, in the barn, there's a part where Mamie Till is talking about, you know, I think it was Mamie Till. It was either her talking about teaching Emmett or one of their relatives teaching another kid, but about like you you do not look at a white woman, you do not talk to a white woman. If like one addresses you, you like if you need to get on your knees, you get on your knees, like things like that. And like just imagine having to like live like that. Like I have too much pride for
Yeah.
that, humbling myself
Absolutely.
in that way is so hard to imagine, but the consequences to any form of self-respect are
Yeah.
so high.
And there would be, I was reading some of the accounts from the survivors, and I mean, there would be like kids would start fights to get kids they didn't like thrown
Right.
into the White Room,
Mm-hmm.
into the White House. And at times there were literally lines of boys waiting to go inside.
Ugh,
So,
it's terrible.
I mean, it was horrific.
Right. And that's just like
Um,
teaching kids to be sociopaths too, right? Like,
yes,
for kids to
absolutely.
learn to send kids they don't like to something like that, is just
Yeah.
evidence of a system that isn't reforming anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Like there was basically no way to escape it.
Hmm.
If a guard decided he didn't like you,
Right.
you're gonna find your way there,
Yeah.
no matter what, no matter how careful you are.
Right.
Which is just yeah. And apparently there was, one dedicated room that was specifically for sexual assault.
Right. Yeah.
Which is just,
Just
like
imagine, like, just imagine, because again, everybody had to know,
right.
like
Yeah.
this is, you can't have that and like, oh, just nobody goes in there or anything like that. Like,
No. It's like
everyone
no.
knows what's going on in there. And again, there's no amount of like, oh, if they're just trained better or had a little more, money or whatever, they totally would have not allowed the sexual abuse room.
Right.
Like,
Oh, if only they'd known.
if
No.
only that, yeah, like, come on, let's be serious
No,
about this.
everyone knew. And with the
Yeah.
amount of investigations and
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Chances are it wasn't just the people there who knew. There were probably plenty of people who should have been fixing something who knew as well.
yeah. So now we're gonna get into the deaths a
Ugh.
little bit. According to a 2009 report following an investigation by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, there were 81 school-related deaths of students between 1911 and 1973.
80, that's more than one a year.
Yeah,
81 deaths
81 deaths
in
in like
62,
yeah,
72. Sorry, what did you say?
like
1911 to 73?
1911 to 1973.
Yeah, in like 60 years.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
Um 31 of these boys were said to be buried on the school grounds with some of the other bodies were shipped home to families or buried in unknown locations. Um, there is a cemetery on the campus with
Just normal
30,
stuff. All of our schools had
obviously,
cemeteries.
right? Your
Yeah.
school cemetery, of
Right. Yeah.
course.
It's just a thing we all had.
That's just the thing we have, right? With they had simple grave markers but no identifications, obviously.
Mhm.
Um, in late 2009, so later that year, the school failed its annual inspection. How
Imagine.
had it passed
Right.
any
Yeah.
inspection
Like,
up to this point?
seriously, what, like,
How?
there has to be a degree to which you can't cover up all of this. Like, like we
Right?
all know, like, when, like, the superintendent was going to stop by the class or whatever, and the teacher's like, please don't embarrass me or
Right.
whatever. Right.
Right.
Like, maybe we tidy up a little
Sure.
bit, but like, what could you have done in past inspections that they wouldn't have been like, fuck?
Right. And like we have reports from previous
Right.
investigations that were
Yeah.
like, hey, stop maybe beating the crap out of all these kids.
Right.
Like, why is
Yeah.
there a cemetery on your
Yeah.
school
Here's
grounds
a
with so
century
many
of
bodies in it?
complaints. Yeah.
So it fails its inspection. And among the problems, the inspection found that the school had, quote, failed to deal properly with the numerous complaints by the boys held there, including allegations of continued mistreatment by the guards. Gee, you think?
Yeah. Imagine.
What?
Good Lord.
2009. This is happening.
2009. And these are still the kids who are going there in 2009 are still like kids, like it's like juvie
It's like
essentially. Yeah.
juvie,
Okay.
basically. Yeah, this at one point, I think I read that it was like, at one point, it was the largest juvenile center in the country.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Good grief.
Um, at this point, State Representative Daryl Rosen said the system was struggling to move on from a long-standing culture of violence and abuse.
It's one way to put it.
Yeah, Daryl, what?
Struggling to move on. Struggling to
Struggling
move
to move
on
on?
is like that's, you have to try to be struggling is the thing. It sounds, when they say struggling to move on, it's more like they would like to still be doing the things from before and they're struggling with the fact that like they need to not.
Exactly. That feels more accurate
Right?
to
It's not
that
like,
statement.
oh, we don't know what to do to not torture kids.
How do we
Like,
not? How do we reform them without beating the shit out of them?
right? Yeah, how do we find guards that don't enjoy tormenting kids? Like,
Children. These are babies.
This is not, yeah, that's not a struggle.
No.
That's just you. I mean, again, it's like the thing where it's like places act like this is some sort of accident or whatever, instead of going like it's they are intentionally finding people
Right.
who dehumanize, who have the ability to dehumanize kids, just like when it comes to hiring cops, right? Like you don't want someone who's hugely empathetic. You don't want people who are
Right.
hugely smart, things like that. You need people who are willing to like take an order and carry it out on potentially an innocent person and be like, that was my job. And like that's what they're doing with like the guards and stuff here, is finding people deliberately who don't mind punishing children
Mm-hmm.
in ways that are antisocial, and the rest of us would be like, yeah, no, I would cry, I would break down, I couldn't do this to
Yeah.
a kid, right? They don't
Yeah.
want us. you
Right.
know they need
They
someone who can
want the
dehumanize people.
soulless monsters.
Mm-hmm.
Here's my favorite thing. The school finally closed in 2011.
Mm, good
Not
lord.
that long ago.
I was married.
Yep.
Not even a newlywed when this closed.
Here's the best part. It closed because of budgetary limitations.
Mm, sure, sure. Yeah, it's
Sure.
not about the kids they're tormenting. It's,
No,
yeah, we
we
ran out
just
of money to torture the kids.
we can't afford to keep it open, so we're
Good
gonna close
lord.
it now.
Well, at least it happened. And I'm sure like there's a degree to which that was like an excuse too. Like,
Of
we
course.
needed a reason to shut this down.
Yeah.
Um, and so there's just no money for it. But it's like
Right.
the
Right.
kids should have been the reason.
The abuse should have
Yeah.
been
Yeah.
the reason. It should have closed in 1903 when they found kids in
Right.
leg irons, but okay.
Exactly. Yeah. Kids shouldn't have still been complaining of being tormented in 2009.
No. But in
Insanity.
2012, a forensic anthropologist named Erin Kimmerl of the University of South Florida was granted permission by the state of Florida to do an anthropology survey of
Mm,
the grounds. And she and her team identified 55 burials on the grounds, most of which were outside of the on campus cemetery.
mm.
And they had this really interesting way of doing it because at this point they hadn't gotten permission to like exhume any bodies.
Right. Yeah, sure.
So like they had this really interesting way of like testing the soil without digging deep enough to find the body to see
Mm.
like, yeah, there's a body
Yeah, as
underneath.
there's, yeah, right, like some sort of human
Yeah.
material or whatever in there. That's
Yeah.
fascinating.
So they were able to like do some cool testing to
Yeah.
determine these things. Um, they documented around 100 deaths,
Jesus Christ.
and she and her team are actively to this day working on DNA testing to try to match
Mm,
who these people are so that
right.
they can contact the families and be
Yeah.
like, "Hey, I think you have a family member who
Right.
was killed
Who
here."
they never knew what happened to, or, whatever.
Exactly. And so far, the results do show that 3 times as many Black students were buried as
Of
white,
course.
which again fits
Yeah.
in with the demographic
Right.
of the school. I do know that there was a fire at the school in like 1914,
Yeah,
and I
which
think
she uses in the
which is in the
reformatory. Yeah.
reformatory. And I think something like 6 people died, including 2 staff members, or maybe it
Hmm.
was 6 kids plus 2 staff members. But
Right.
even if you take that out,
Yeah.
the
You're still
amount of
dealing with an
deaths, it's like
incredible amount of deaths. Yeah.
so
And
much death.
that's just bodies they found there, right?
Yes.
Because they did send some home and stuff
Yes.
like that, as you mentioned before. And they did have some marked graves around
Yes.
as well. So this is
This
a
is in
hundred
addition.
plus
Yeah,
that they did not have a record of.
exactly. Um, in 2017, a ceremony was held to apologize to 2 dozen survivors of the school and to families of the other victims. And then in 2018, there were bills being considered to provide some compensation to the victims
Should
and their
hope so.
descendants, right? They're, maybe
Sorry is not good enough.
sorry is
Like,
not good
if it
enough.
were 100 years past anyone being alive or something, fine, you give the family a sorry or whatever. But like, these people are
Like
still alive.
there are survivors today.
Right. Yeah. And
Um,
some from not that long ago. Some
right.
from, I mean, if someone was a 10-year-old in
Hmm.
1968 at that school, they're younger than my mother.
Yeah. Yeah,
Like that's a person who's still got life ahead of them, that and all of that
absolutely.
scarring behind them.
Absolutely. Um, in late March of 2019, an additional 27 possible graves were discovered
Wow.
during a pollution cleanup
Oh,
on the
wow.
site.
So they weren't even looking
They
for it.
weren't
It
even
was just
looking
like,
for them.
oops, all bodies.
Yeah. Now, in June of 2022, Aaron Kemerl, who is the leader of the anthropology team, published a book called We Carry Their Bones: The Search for Justice at the Dozier School for Boys. Um, I also found other books that were written about this, some books written by survivors,
Hmm.
others just written about, this school. I know that there are documentaries and things like that. And again, you can find lists of these things on the White House
Oh,
Boys
yeah, sure.
website.
Hmm.
They have like a whole
Like,
thing where you
yeah,
can like read
resources.
stories,
Hmm.
you can find like there's like a YouTube playlist of clips and things. So there's some there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, seriously.
Um, but the whole reason I even found out about this, as I mentioned at the top, was because of the Reformatory.
Right.
I'd
Yeah.
never heard of this school.
Me neither.
Um,
Happening to like read multiple things or see multiple things about this place at the same time is like really surprising because I've never heard of this, which is
absolutely.
wild. Like the
It's
scale
insane.
of this is
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah. And I don't know how this wasn't. And I mean, there were like things that were publicized nationally about this in the early 2000s,
Sure.
and I was young enough to probably just not be
Yeah,
paying
right.
attention.
Hmm.
Yeah, I was in high school and I just like wasn't
I mean,
aware
yeah,
of
I'm
things.
like at the point at which this, like a lot of this stuff happened, like it was late 20s,
Right.
like you would think I would have encountered some of this stuff, but
Huh. But
yeah.
yeah, um so it's interesting. So Tananarive Due, she published The Reformatory in October of 2023. And the novel is dedicated to her great uncle, Robert Stevens, who died at the Dozier School for Boys in 1937 at the age of 15. She only learned about his existence in 2013 when the Florida State Attorney General's office called her and said, "You might have a family member who was buried here."
So
Um,
crazy.
yeah. And so she
See,
did some
just think of,
research.
yeah, like the degree of like all those kids, how many families just had to kind of like let it go and just not, you know,
Yeah.
to deal with it would just kind of pretend that person never existed,
Yeah.
like
And
what do
again,
you
like
do
some of
with
these
that
kids were
loss?
runaways.
Right,
Like,
yeah, totally.
you
Like who
know,
knows where, yeah, if their
like
family had any idea what happened,
their
if they
family may
that they
never
ever
have
even
known.
crossed those, yeah, those thresholds.
Yeah. Um, so all that's to say is that the reformatory is just like horrifically accurate,
Yeah,
especially if you take out the part about the ghosts. Like that
right, yeah.
really is the only piece that
Yeah,
isn't
that's not
like
straight from
historically
the
accurate.
stories. Yeah.
Um, and again, like the abuses described in the novel match some of the actual accounts of the survivors that I was reading. There were a lot of things that I was like, oh, I remember
Like, oh
reading that
no.
in the
Yeah.
book. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yep. Um, this book, I read a lot of horror, as you
Yeah.
all know. Like I am fairly, I would say, like desensitized or what have you. This book gave me an actual panic attack.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize what was happening. I was listening to it on the way to work and enjoying it. It's a phenomenal
Yeah.
book.
So well written. I
It's
mean,
so gorgeously
it's
written. Like
incredible.
she's a talent.
Yeah.
She is a powerhouse. And I got to work and I was like, I was just, getting ready for my day and like my heart was racing and I could not figure out what was going on. And then I
Yeah.
realized I was like, I'm having a panic attack because of the book I'm reading.
Right. Yeah.
Like it was so tense
Mm-hmm.
and And at that point, I don't even think I knew it was historically based.
Right, yeah. Because she mentions it in the afterword,
She
but
talks about
like
it in
it's
the
not,
afterward,
yeah, it's
but
not
like,
set up like that. Yeah.
no, but it was just the idea that I was like, I know things like this have happened.
Right. Yes, exactly.
And it just like it sent me into a spiral,
Yeah.
which does not happen often
Right. Like when
when
it
reading
like
books.
yeah, when you read stuff all the time that's full of violence and
Yeah.
gore and bad things happening to people and stuff like that. But I think that
Yeah.
really is what hits so hard about that, aside with just how well written it is and everything, is I think you're spot on that like I didn't necessarily know it was based on an actual place till the end of it, but it was very clear this was based on real things
Yeah.
that happened to real children, you know?
Right.
Like that part was, crystal clear throughout that
Yes.
book. And I think that's always, when it comes to reading about whether a fictional tale or a nonfiction one, when you're thinking about this kind of stuff, it's like what I was saying a few weeks ago about going on the ghost tour in New Orleans and then
Hmm.
going on that ghost tour or dark history tour in Italy. Like
Mm.
when you connect to the fact that like these are horrific things that happened to real people, it's like the humanity in you, if you're not, there are obviously always people on this that are just like ghosts and they don't
Right.
connect it to
Right.
people at all
Sure.
or whatever. But when you connect with the humanity of like people who've been through just this incredible suffering, um, it's like very hard to just kind of like detach
Yeah.
from that. And again, that like it's not that long ago that this happened. Like all of these kids would be younger than my mother.
Yeah.
And, she's not that old.
Right.
And like that, yeah, we just by luck and whatnot, we are northern black people and
Right.
not southern black people. Um,
Right.
and I don't know whatever history. I mean, I know part of my family like immigrated here from Bermuda, but I don't know about like parts of my family who probably were slaves who at some point
Yeah.
came this way by any accident of birth or whatever. We could have been Southerners and dealt with the same kinds of shit. Um, and it's just, yeah, there's something about reading these kinds of things that really forces you to confront this ugliness that is so recent in our history. And that, like, if a lot of people, again, in our government right now have their way they'd love to bring back. It's why it's terrifying to watch them cover up like Black history things in museums and in government buildings and stuff like that, because sticking a plaque on the White House was one of the first things they did at this Dozier School to like signal
Yeah.
this was fucked up.
Yeah.
That's like one of our first things that we do is put something up to acknowledge that something horrific has happened. And the act of undoing that is permission, right? It's a way of
Yeah.
like saying we don't acknowledge that there was anything wrong with what happened here. And we need to ignore that history, which, we all know is how it happens again.
Yeah.
It's,
Yep.
it's a cool thing to have to be vigilant for,
Super
especially as
cool.
immigrants are being sent to Guantanamo and things like that.
Mm.
Like, you know, we're going to find out all kinds of horrible stories about that in a few years,
Yeah.
realistically. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, crazy.
Yeah. So, all that's to say, read The Reformatory.
Yeah,
It
read
is
the
one of
Reformatory, read the Barn.
best. Read The
Um,
Barn.
yeah, read
Uh,
all of this.
read all the
And
things. Look for the documentaries.
yeah,
Inform
because we have
yourself.
to, yeah, I think that's the thing is we have to know about these things and how bad
Mhm.
things can really get and how little people care.
Right.
I think that's one of the things that really hits home about how you've described this is like there was a century of
Century.
intervention
Hmm.
and no one gave a shit. Nobody cared enough to like shut it down or
Mm-mm.
make great reforms to it or anything like that. Um, when you dehumanize a group of people, whether that's Black kids or whether that is delinquents of any color, things like
Hmm.
that, and sort of be like, they don't deserve to be treated like we expect our own children to be treated.
Right.
This is the kind of shit that you end up with.
Yep.
our troubled teen industry, as I keep mentioning, like, a thing that still exists, and still tortures
Mm-hmm.
children to this day.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah,
we allow this to happen. Um,
absolutely.
and it's something we have to pay more attention to.
Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
It is a downer, but it's context that's sorely needed.
Yeah.
And, I think is, like I said, I think there's something in the moment that is causing people to revisit this stuff. And having
Yeah.
just read those books, uh, it's on my mind. Also, the John Henry book's called Steel Driving Man. If anyone wants to, it like came to me just now. Like that book is called Steel Driving Man, which is a fascinating story as well of our country being built on this kind of thing. The
Yeah.
stuff that we enjoy now. It wasn't just cotton. It wasn't just the people building the White House, but like the very infrastructure of this country being built upon black bodies and the prison industrial complex that
Mm-hmm.
we are seeing now as firefighters, incarcerated firefighters, fighting our wildfires in California, and McDonald's using prison labor. Like, like so many things in our lives are still off the backs of people um, who are the it's because Reconstruction failed, and it's because the
Mm-hmm.
13th Amendment exists, and we do this to people. So I appreciate that context, Ryan.
Yes. Yeah. It was I'm glad I ended up going that route. Uh
Yeah.
because it was
We'll
really
be back
fascinating
another
to
time to
learn.
talk about some other things, but
Oh my
this is
God,
a
the amount of
fascinating
the amount of
we are
weird
rabbit
deaths I
holing.
read about.
Listen, I got an assignment for Wisecrack this week, and the gal who assigns me things was like, we need you because nobody rabbit holes like you do. It's like I do that. It's like on this particular site, like sometimes she's like, we need you to like hone in, don't
Yeah.
rabbit hole. You work too much if you rabbit hole.
Hmm.
This time she was like, no, go crazy. It's like find
Yeah.
everything. So there's just so many things.
There's so many things, and like that's how I start, because I remember you and Mark both talking about how like you'll look up one thing on Wikipedia and then just kind of like
Yes.
pull up the sources and just like rabbit hole that way. And so I found a Reddit thread from 2020
Oh
when
yeah,
everyone
those will
was in
get you.
lockdown, and it
Mhm.
was like, here are my favorite rabbit holes on
Ooh,
on
nice.
Wikipedia. And oh my God, there were so many just like, weird deaths and like weird like human just so much
Yeah.
weird humanity, right?
Weird
And
humanity,
oh my
exactly.
God. And I also like I have so many like nonfiction horror stuff
Yeah.
that I was like flipping through. I was like, oh, maybe I'll talk about like the origin story of some of our most famous like urban legends and stuff like that. And I was just like,
Ooh.
that's 5 minutes of me talking. That's nothing.
I don't know. I feel like there's something there,
I
We'll have
did
to
find
revisit
out,
that around Halloween or something.
I did learn about a guy who was, I think, maybe the first person to ever be like sentenced as a werewolf. He's this French guy
I was
in
gonna
like
say it's French, isn't it? It's always got to
definitely
be
French.
French.
He
Yeah.
was definitely French. He was just a cannibal. Like he wasn't
Just regular kind.
just a regular cannibal, but he was yeah, the people called him a werewolf. And then I read another story about consensual cannibalism, which I think you guys had talked about, maybe
Yeah,
this guy
yeah.
before who like found a guy
Yeah,
online.
Armin Mivas.
Yeah. Yeah, I read about him a little bit.
Nice.
So
Yeah.
much fun.
He's one of Mark's favorites, He seems
Yeah.
like just like he's like a nice guy. He went about it in
It
a
was
nice way.
consensual.
It was consensual. He didn't want to hurt nobody.
You just
He just
wanted to eat
wanted
a guy.
to eat a guy.
Yeah.
Let
Wow.
he who is without sin cast the first stone or something. I
Uh,
don't want to eat a guy, just for the record.
I don't.
One of the early episodes of this was me talking about how traumatized I was by the foot tacos.
Oh
No,
God.
I
Yeah.
don't. I don't want to do that.
I don't need a guy. But
No,
yeah,
I like my.
ultimately I am who I am, so I had to bring it back to books. So
I know. I appreciate that thematic. That was
you
good.
know, had to
Giving
be
us a
on.
chance also to toss some recs out there. Before you go,
Absolutely.
anything? What's your one book right now that you're like everybody read this
Oh,
besides what you've
Victorian
just talked
Psycho.
about? Victorian
Victorian Psycho.
Psycho. Is it out? It just
It is
released.
out.
Okay.
It is officially out. We've already sold 16 copies. It came out
Nice.
last week.
Not that you're keeping track.
I am obsessed with this insane book. It's already
Beautiful.
slated to be a movie,
Nice.
starring what's her name? The girl from The Substance.
Oh,
Margaret Morgan
Margaret
Qualley?
Qualley. Yes,
Margaret
that's the
Qualley.
one. Nice.
Um, will be playing the
I hope she
titular
becomes like a
Psycho.
scream queen. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, I hope so.
I think she's got the chops for
Um,
that.
it is, my coworker described it as Jane Eyre plus American Psycho.
Okay.
Um, it is one of the funniest books I've ever read.
Nice. Okay.
Uh, because I'm deeply dark.
Well,
But it's one of the greatest, like, fuck rich people
ooh,
books.
nice. We need
Um,
that. We need that
it's
now.
so much fun. She's a governess. She gets a job as a governess for these just awful rich children in this
Nice.
awful rich family. Um, and she's deranged. And like she like introduces herself at one point to one of the kids, and her name is Winifred, and the boy says something like, "Can I call you Fred?" And she goes, "Fred's the name of my demon." Like she just loves fucking with these.
Amazing. I'm
And
in.
like she's just like, the best part about it is like, because these people are so rich and living in their own world and so unaware of the help, she is literally just murdering people almost in front of them and they're not noticing.
Nice.
It is hysterical. It is insane. It has the meat, it has the juice.
Nice.
Um it's just wild, and it's super short.
Ooh,
It's
that appeals
wicked
to me.
short.
Love a
It's like a
short book.
little novella. And I have gotten almost every single staff member at Gibson's to read it, and everyone has loved it.
Oh,
And we
beautiful.
all read different things.
Nice. Yeah.
It is just my favorite. We have a virtual event with the author next Tuesday on the 11th, and I'm just
Nice.
like, I don't even know what I want to say to her. I just want to be like, "Thank you. Tell me about your brain."
Right. You should ask Australian Dan for some questions.
Oh, that's a great idea. That's a great
You know,
idea.
the expert on listening to horror podcast interviews and whatnot.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So that is my like that's my number one recommendation. And then my number
Beautiful.
two is Wake Up and Open Your Eyes by McLeod Chapman.
I keep
Mm.
starting it, but I'm so bad at reading my physical books because normally I
Yeah.
play video games and listen to my
Right.
books. And so like just last week I like took it somewhere and I like started it and I'm like immediately into it. I love
Hmm.
Clay McLeod Chapman.
Yeah.
And but then of course I come home and I'm like, if I'm gonna read a book, I'm gonna listen to it. So I should just get
Yeah.
like the
You should
the
just get the audiobook.
audiobook. You know, it's like I feel like because you sent me the signed copy of it, and I'm
Right.
like, oh, I have it. I should read this. Like just you don't have you've got a cool signed copy. Just put it on the shelf and then listen to the book.
It
I don't know
is
why I've made this weird rule for myself that I need to read the paper one.
it's a wild time.
I mean, it's Clay McLeod Chapman.
It's Clay, so it's gonna get weird.
It's gonna get weird for sure.
But it is, obviously horrifyingly relevant because this
Mm,
is a like plague of media,
yes.
basically.
Yeah. Which just in the beginning of this book, his descriptions, like he is basically this sort of main character here from just the first chapter or whatever of it,
Mhm.
or couple of chapters, has like lost his parents to the equivalent of Fox News,
Yeah.
essentially. And it's, oh man, he goes into their house and it's like just the TVs are blasting everywhere and
Mhm.
the place is in disarray and they are just like Fox News zombies,
Hmm.
essentially, you know? And it's like,
Hmm.
it feels, I think, people who have relatives who have succumbed to this, like it feels very real in
Yeah.
that way. Like this is like obviously a horror version of it, but it's not that far off from like what it actually is like
Yeah.
having family members who are suddenly in this weird like QAnon-y zone because they watch too much Tucker.
Yeah. Right. And I will say, if you can get through the entire scene in his parents' house, because it
Yeah, it gets
goes
oof.
places.
Yes,
If
it
you
goes
can get
places
through
that you're
that,
like, yeah, oh no.
you'll be
Oh
good.
no.
It
His
is.
mom gets weird.
His mom
Uh
gets weird. It's
it's
fine. Ugh.
fine. It's totally fine.
It's fine.
But yeah,
He
that's
and
one I
I
gotta get
actually
to.
he and I actually had a phone call after I finished my bound manuscript of it. Uh because he was so nervous about this one coming out.
Yeah?
Like he was so scared about this book coming out. And of course, it's getting incredible
Yeah,
reviews, which I
everything I've
told
seen
him it
is
would.
people, yeah,
I was like, this is
raving
gonna
about
find
it.
its audience. Like, don't worry.
Mm.
But I guess it was one where like he had his wife read it and she couldn't finish it.
Oh,
And that
wow.
like that fucked him up, I think, a
Yeah,
little bit. And then
right.
like one of his author friends who he asked to blurb it was like, I refuse to blurb this based on
Wow.
like the politics of it. And I think that fucked him up
Wow.
too.
Yeah,
And I
for
was just like,
real.
Clay, it's gonna be okay.
Yeah, no, it
It's
is.
gonna be okay, I promise. And
That
of course it's
audience is
selling super
very much
well.
there.
Like
Yeah.
the audience is there. Like, this is the catharsis we need
Yeah. So
and
Wake
we're
Up and
happy
Open
about it.
Your Eyes by Clay
Yeah.
McLeod Chapman and
Yeah.
Victorian Psycho by
Virginia Feito or
Virginia
Feito.
Feito.
She's Spanish.
One of those. Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Like, sorry, I have like a sneeze. It's just like sitting in my
She's like
nose.
building.
Just like, yeah, Virginia Feito. Spain. Nice. It's like Russ is just making weird faces at you. So it's like, really interesting. Okay. So
So
check
yeah,
those
those are
out.
my
And of course, check out the Laydown podcast, which is always just like a
yeah.
delightful, charming time.
Aw.
Whether you guys have someone on that you're interviewing or are just talking about books in general, it's lots of laughter, it's lots
Yes.
of excitement and hyperfixation and all of the things that are just like for people who really love books, this is the podcast for people who love like just the joy of reading. So if you haven't listened to Lay Down and you are a reader, you gotta check it out. It's a wonderful time, and you often have great guests.
I do.
Yes,
Yes. I do often have great
yeah,
guests.
really phenomenal guests who are very fun, and I always just enjoy kind of hearing insights into the writing process. But often, I think one of the things I really love on the Laydown is the things that you get sort of outside of their writing processes about these people, and just kind of like
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, you know, feel like they can just chat shit with you.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
is very fun. And so like, yeah, it's cool learning about people's process and stuff, but it's also fun just like the random stories they end up telling or random insights, tidbits about who they are as a person
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
always really cool.
One of
So,
my favorite interviews, think it was I think it was Allie Hazelwood. We just went on a rant about the publishing industry for like
right. Yeah.
20 minutes.
And it's like
It
that's
was so
insights you
much
don't
fun.
necessarily get
Yeah.
everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Especially not from like just like you might listen to a publishing podcast that has like very serious insights and numbers and whatever, but it's different than just hearing someone be like, "Oh, don't get me started," and then going off and why something is the way it is and getting someone's like candid
Yeah.
thoughts on something.
She was like, ugh, I wish I could be talking about the book that I'm actually writing right now because that's the one that's in my brain. But of
Right.
course, I have to talk about this book that I finished like 2 years ago, but now it's finally out and I don't even remember my character's name. Like, it was so
Right.
funny. I was like, I love you.
Oh, geez, there are the sneezes. Good
Hey, we
gravy.
got him.
Found their way out. But yeah, all that to say, listen to the Laydown. Ryan, thank you so much for coming in clutch and chatting today. Marco,
Of course.
of course, is grateful as well for you
Mhm.
taking on his role this week, or I'm taking on this role. I don't know. Where, whatever. Oh my God, I'm just, Ugh. Jesus Christ. Okay, everybody, I'm gonna go sneeze now. So you all remember to stay spooky.
Stay spooky.